nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors Conservative Roundtable, now being shown all over the United States and on YouTube. We have a special guest for this broadcast, my friend Grover Norquist. Grover is a man of extraordinary accomplishment. He's one of the key leaders of the conservative movement. He's been on the board and currently is on the board of the National Rifle Association. He's on the board of the American Conservative Union. He's been a contributing editor to American Spectator. He is president of the American Society of Competitiveness. He authored the book, Leave Us Alone, Getting the Government's Hands Off Our Money, Our Guns, Our Lives. He's done many, many other things. He, at one point, was executive director of the College Republicans, the National Taxpayers Union. He was on the staff of the Republican Platform Committee at least 3 conventions. But he's best known as a key leader in the fight against taxes. He's president of Americans for Tax Reform. And let's begin our conversation with that, Grover. And let me begin by sharing with our audience something that you told me years ago, and that your fervent opposition to high taxes stemmed from something your parents taught you about ice cream.
Well, yeah, it's true, actually. There was a piece of the pie, anyway. After church, we'd go by the Dairy Joy, which was just between church and home, and the kids would each get an ice cream cone. Parents wouldn't get ice cream cones. But Dad would come and take a bite of your ice cream cone and say, income tax. And they'd come back a little while later and say, sales tax. And it kept coming back with each time with a new and different name for a tax. So early on, I understood the connection between taxation and theft.
What have you been able to achieve in fighting taxes?
Well, back in 1986, I created the Taxpayer Protection Pledge. This is a pledge that candidates for the House, Senate, presidency, and now state legislators and governors sign saying, I promise not to raise taxes. And it's witnessed by 2 people. And you date it and witness it, and you sign your name to it, and we share it with the press, and we put it up on our website, atr.org, and we put it in a big safe, the actual original copy. And we have about 95% of the Republicans in the House and Senate have taken the pledge. All the Republican presidents in recent history or presidential candidates have taken the pledge.
How many of them have broken the pledge?
One, Bush Sr., broke it in 1990. And that's actually when the pledge took off. Because originally when we did it, had about 100 people in the House took the pledge, 20 in the Senate. It was okay, not bad, because it's a pretty definitive pledge. I promise not to raise taxes. Then in 1988, Bush Sr. took the pledge, defeated Dole, who refused to take the pledge. And matter of fact, I think it was Pete DuPont handed the pledge to Dole at the New Hampshire debate, saying, the rest of us have all signed the pledge. What about you? And Dole reacted like the scene in the movie where the cross goes after the vampire, and the vampire recoils in horror. Which is a little bit odd, but he really, he really reacted poorly. And CBS and the Wall Street Journal, a number of publications said they thought that was the turning point, because Dole was supposed to win in New Hampshire. He just won in Iowa. He failed to win in New Hampshire, and Bush went on to win. Took the pledge, won the primary, took the pledge, said, read my lips at the convention.
No new taxes.
Said, when he said, read my lips, he said, I'm running for Ronald Reagan's 3rd term. But he got elected, turned around, and in 1990 agreed to a tax increase that the Democrats wanted and that he put up a perfunctory opposition to, but he sat down, had a compromise, tax increase, lost 2 years later.
2 of the nefarious influences were Jim Baker and Dick Darman. Darman has now passed into the next world. You and I have both gone to Harvard. Did you know Darman in college?
I didn't. I think he's actually from my hometown. I think he was in Weston or had something to do with Weston, Massachusetts. And Darman was, in fact, adamant at pushing a tax increase. And unfortunately, Sununu, former governor of New Hampshire, told Bush that he'd square it with conservatives, as if he could go.
Yeah, Sununu was wrong about Souter as well.
Yes, and he told Bush he'd go explain to us that it would be okay for Bush to raise taxes, and said, no, Bush's promise wasn't to a handful of conservative leaders, it was a promise to the American people. And the pledge itself is not a promise to Americans for tax reform. My organization, it pledge says, I promise the American people I won't raise taxes. So when Bush lost in '92, it tremendously strengthened the pledge because people understood taking it made Bush win the primary, taking it allowed Bush to win the general, breaking it cost him the presidency. And then all of a sudden going into 94, 96, 98, the number of pledge takers went up to virtually every new Republican running for the House and Senate took the pledge.
Obama has a terrible record of bad promises on taxes.
Yes.
What do you think is likely to happen on taxes? Death tax, other taxes, et cetera?
He will raise taxes as much as he thinks he can get away with. He lied to the American people when he said he would only raise taxes on people who earned more than $250,000. 16 days into his presidency, he signed a tax increase, which was on tobacco consumption, but 25% of the country uses tobacco. The only person who uses tobacco and makes more than $250,000 a year is named Barack Obama. It's not a rich person's...
But he doesn't advertise it.
Yeah, it's not a rich person's vice. And so 16 days in, he broke that promise. And now he's coming back for other tax increases. The big one will be a value-added tax, a national sales tax, and that was just floated as an idea in the Washington Post.
I saw that article today. Yeah. What do you think its chances are?
I think we can stop it. The good news is that every country that introduced the VAT, the government that did so fell in the next election. The bad news is that while the government that puts the VAT in falls, the value-added tax tends to stay.
One of the things that Mr. Obama has done is name a potential successor to David Souter for the Supreme Court. Now, this program is not going to be shown as we're taping. It'll be a few weeks late. But today, Newt Gingrich, who I know is a big admirer of yours and your friend, said that Obama's nominee should withdraw because she is a racist bigot.
That's interesting and very aggressive on Newt's part, but I think if he's referring to what I think he's referring to, which is her support in a case for racial quotas.
Yeah, she basically said it's okay for a Latina to do certain things, but it would not be okay for a white jurist to do them.
And she said because of her ethnic background, she knows more or could make better decisions than somebody else of a different ethnic background. If a white person said that, they would in fact have to withdraw. That would be prima facie case evidence of being a racist. And I think we need to get away from the idea of saying some people are allowed to be racists and others aren't. In point of fact, there is racial bigotry in the country. It exists in many, many places, and we ought to say no to it. And yes, by any measure, the woman that has been put forward for Supreme Court appointment is, by her own, in her own words, we're not assuming things, is racially bigoted.
She's also pretty bad on the gun issue. And I know you're a leader in the right to keep and bear arms movement. And do you think that will be something raised effectively in the confirmation hearings?
For months, people have been saying, when a Supreme Court fight comes up, the broad center-right conservative movement will engage because a judge deals with so many issues. We were given a gift from the gods by his particular choice of this very left-wing judge, who on video and in writing has said the Second Amendment doesn't matter. That
she said it doesn't apply to individuals.
Yes, which means it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Which, of course, the real Supreme Court has ruled exactly the other way. So you mentioned I serve on the board of directors of the National Rifle Association, about 4 million members in the country.
And you told me they had 63,000 people at their convention.
Yes, they had the largest political dinner in Arizona's history just a couple weeks ago. And so the good news is the National Rifle Association, as a defender of Second Amendment rights, institutionally is getting stronger and stronger. It is a model for all the other working parts of the Reagan Republican center-right conservative movement. If other issues organized as well as the NRA did, we'd have fewer problems.
Grover, regrettably, we have to take a break. We'll be back right after these messages. Please stay with us and our special guest, Grover Norquist, the leader of the anti-tax movement in America.
Hi, I'm United States Representative Thaddeus McCotter from Michigan's 11th Congressional District. As we enter a new millennium of hope and peril, with so many problems besetting our country and yet so many opportunities before us, it is oftentimes tempting to think that your voice doesn't matter. What can one person do to make a difference in the life of their community and their country? Well, the first thing you can do is to contact your legislator. You are one of the sovereign citizens of the United States. You elect your servants to work for you in Congress. Let them know what you think. Send them a letter, send them an email, call them on the phone. Your voice matters, because if you don't raise your voice in the interest of our free republic, who will?
My name is Walter Jones. I represent the 3rd Congressional District in North Carolina, the home of Camp Lejeune Marine Base. And I'm pleased to be here today to encourage the American people to remember that their voices need to be heard by those of us in Washington, D.C., both the House side and the Senate side, that there are too many issues facing this country. There'll be a new president in 2009, and we need to let our voices be heard. From immigration issues to terrorism to the fact that this country's debt, we owe China over $900 billion. But I want those people that might be seeing this interview to know that we, the American people, with the help of God, we can change the direction of this nation. Just like the American people did on the issue of amnesty when it was before the Senate. They made telephone calls, they sent faxes, emails, and they wrote letters, and they said to the Senate, do not pass this amnesty bill, and it was killed.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors Conservative Roundtable, with our guest, Grover Norquist. Grover, let me ask you a difficult question. You've been called the leader of the Leave Us Alone coalition. And there have been comments recently by Colin Powell, Tom Ridge, about the need for the Republican Party to broaden the base and let people in who may take a more, quote, liberal stance on social issues such as gay rights, such as abortion, and so forth. How should the Republican Party deal with those differences of opinion?
I would urge the Republicans and conservatives within the Republican Party to work to elect the most Reagan-like candidate that you can from each state. Now, that will be a different candidate in Texas than Vermont. But in Vermont, you could elect candidates that won't raise taxes. The 2 moderate lady senators from Maine do not vote for tax increases. They have various impulses that would differ from a candidate perhaps from Florida or Wyoming. But again, the 50 states are different, and there will be differences of opinion, and that's okay. What the left has done is they've cobbled together people who are very left on labor union issues, trial lawyer issues, tax issues, and have 1 or 2 conservative issues that they highlight and get elected in North Carolina or Georgia as Democrats. So I think conservatives should work for as conservative a Republican Party as doable in any given election cycle and in any particular state, with the ultimate goal of, even in Vermont, making the case for more Reaganite policies than perhaps Vermont would elect today, looking forward to 2 and 4 years from now.
Let's go back briefly to the gun issue. And we referenced the Supreme Court nominee's wrong position on that the Second Amendment applies to militias but not to individuals. What about what the D.C. government is doing, ignoring the Heller decision of the Supreme Court? Do you think Congress can or will act to overturn the impudence of the D.C. government?
Well, the good news is that the National Rifle Association and people who care about the Second Amendment are organized enough, and Congress hears them enough, that there is a majority of the House and the Senate members who will vote for pro-Second Amendment positions.
And by the way, the intrusion of this issue probably will prevent D.C. from getting representation in the House.
It may well, because the House and Senate are working to get gun rights, Second Amendment rights, into a bill that Obama wants to use to get voting rights for the District of Columbia. He could have both. He can't have the one without the other. And it's interesting to see where his interests lie. So this is an issue that, again, I find as a model for conservative activists. I think the parental rights movement, the homeschooler movement, the taxpayer movement, all should look at the success of the NRA. And that's why I'm on the board of the NRA, frankly. And I said that is a group that organizes for freedom in a way that I want to learn how they do it. One, to support their efforts, but also I'm there to learn how taxpayers and other groups could fight more effectively for freedom.
Talk about the Tea Parties. There was an extraordinary outpouring of popular concern about taxes on the 15th of April with Tea Parties all over the country. And supposedly this is going to happen again on the 4th of July. Tell us what you think about all this.
Well, this is fascinating, because I would have told you 2 months ago, 2 years ago, 20 years ago, that you can't get the American people out to demonstrate or become politically active in response to spend too much, that you have to wait until tax too much follows spend too much, and then people will react. 78, 80 people reacted to tax increases, property tax, sales tax, income tax increases, and inflation, and got active. 94 people reacted to Clinton's tax increases. This time around, people reacted to the spend too much of the stimulus package. There hadn't yet been a significant tax increase imposed. That's still coming. So to have, we calculate at least 600,000 people, maybe more, were out at demonstrations. At Americans for Tax Reform, at our website, we have a list of all the rallies and how many people were at each one, using the most small c conservative estimate from the police, from the press, from people who were there. 600,000 people. We could not and did not put 600,000 people into the streets 4 months into Carter. We didn't have that strength 4 months into Clinton. But 4 months into the Obama administration, 600,000 people, and that means something. These were not college students with nothing else to do. These were not union people that were on payroll and working on clock. These were people who had families and jobs, and they stepped away from both for several hours in a day to go to a rally. Look at the pictures of the rallies, homemade signs, not the kind of signs you see at union rallies or at left-of-center rallies that are printed up. Very, very impressive, the level of activism. We'll see it again on July 4th. And I love the idea of hundreds of rallies around the country rather than trying to get one rally in D.C.
How can we translate this into policy? How can we translate this, even going so far as to kill the income tax or repeal the 16th Amendment? Is that utterly beyond the pale? Does that ever become a practical possibility in our politics?
I think it does, and one of the goals, in my view, is to start killing the income tax in individual states. Right now, there are 9 states without an income tax. We need to go to states like Oklahoma and Georgia and Arizona and phase out the income tax there, because a lot of people can't imagine no income tax at the national level because all their lives they've lived with one. Most of the lifetime of the Republic, there wasn't an income tax.
Now, I know that your views on trade are probably different than mine. The Conservative Caucus, during the coming year, we're celebrating our 35th anniversary, is going to be operating on the theme, tariffs, not taxes. I once had an argument with Milton Friedman about this, in which I made the point that the country would be better off if you had no income tax whatsoever and followed the original constitutional design of paying for constitutional programs with tariffs and excises. And that's something we're going to be pushing as an organization, and we're going to be calling for the abolition of the IRS and the income tax.
Well, certainly if you move to that, you could fund a government with just tariffs if it was much smaller than the present government.
Well, that's part of our plan. Cut it down to constitutional size. Yeah. That's something I've always favored.
One step in that direction, one light, if not at the end of the tunnel, but one light in the tunnel, is a new movement in the country, only a few years old, called the transparency movement.
I wanted you to talk about that. Yeah.
I first ran into it. I was calling around to governors, talked to Governor Rick Perry of Texas, and he said that what he was doing was posting on his check register of all government checks up on the web. So I started calling around to other governors, to political activists around the country. We now have 20 states that have passed laws or have executive orders from governors saying every check that the state writes goes on the web with a search engine so you can find them.
Let me put in a good word for Barack Obama. He and Tom Coburn co-sponsored legislation to put all government grants and contracts on the web, which is something I've been fighting for years, because the FOIA was very limited. I couldn't get Orrin Hatch or anybody to help me on it. But
I went to the administration, the Bush administration, as did Ralph Nader, independently, and suggested that they do this in 2001. Mitch Daniels, who was the head of OMB at the time, wanted to do it. President Dick Cheney didn't want to, because everything had to be a secret, including the government's books. But now that Mitch Daniels is governor of Indiana, day one, he put the contracts up online so people can see the state contracts. Utah has just done something that I hope other states will follow. They passed a law a year ago to make the state transparent, state spending transparent. This year, this spring, they passed a law that said all local governments, school boards, counties, cities, towns, their budgets and spending and checkbooks will have to be transparent.
Very important stuff, very important. We have to take another break, Grover, and then we'll come back and we'll have about 2 minutes for you to say whatever you want to say, including, I hope, information to our viewers about what they can do to learn more about your work and become part of it.
Sure.
Our guest is Grover Norquist. Please stay with us. We'll be back for some closing comments from Mr. Norquist right after these messages. For those of us who love the Constitution of the United States and the principles of liberty on which it was premised, one of the worst years in American history was 1913. Among other things, that was the year in which the 16th Amendment was added to the Constitution, giving the federal government the opportunity to impose a graduated income tax and to, in other ways, directly invade our privacy and rob us of our resources. Until 1913, the revenue tariff was the major source of income for Uncle Sam. The Conservative Caucus strives to repeal the 16th Amendment, abolish the Internal Revenue Service, and eliminate the income tax. Please join with us in this important cause.
The Conservative Caucus, www.conservativeusa.org or 703-938-9626.
Here's how you can become a citizen lobbyist and influence how your representatives vote. Write a letter to your congressmen and senators. Speak out on a call-in talk radio program. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper and call the Conservative Caucus for more information at 703-938-9626.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, Chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors Conservative Roundtable, now being seen nationwide, perhaps even in your community and communities you visit, also on YouTube. And if you're interested in the kinds of issues we discuss on Conservative Roundtable, I hope you'll check out the website of the Conservative Caucus, www.conservativeusa.org. If you'd like some of our literature without cost or obligation, fax me your contact information at 703-281-4108 or snail mail me at 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180. And please keep watching Conservative Roundtable. Grover, it's been a pleasure having you as our guest. And why don't you tell those watching this broadcast how they can become involved in the work you do?
Sure. Well, our website for Americans for Tax Reform is atr.org, and we send out a weekly email about what's happening on taxes around the country, and we work with local taxpayer groups and state taxpayer groups around the country. So atr.org is the way to get in touch with us, and we'd love to work with people. What
are our chances of killing the death tax, Grover?
Oh, eventually we will. It just is going to require 60 Republicans, conservative Republicans, in the U.S. Senate. So it's a little way away, but the answer is we'll eventually get it, because 60 to 70% of the American people don't like the tax, even though it's portrayed as a tax only on other people, right, on very rich people. It bothers people's sense of fairness, so we'll get it.
There's a lot more we can discuss, but we have no more time, Grover. I really appreciate your visiting with us, and I'm sure our audience enjoyed hearing from you. Keep up your great work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Grover.